Before we get too deep, I want to know, raise your hand if you are a designer. Like, I just want to get a lay of the land here. Okay, so 80% designers. Raise your hand if you're a product manager. Okay, cool. Developers? Okay. Miscellaneous and or other things. 3. Okay. This is the audience I was hoping for. So like, I'm going to be speaking mostly to UX designers, product managers. Like, obviously this will be relevant for you as well. And this is really for both, but we can kind of vent about how weird product managers are. Okay, so my wife is in law school, and when I showed her my presentation last night, she said the first thing you got to do is put a disclaimer. That's what she learned on the first day of school. Always put a disclaimer. I am going to make some generalizations about people, okay? About designers and product managers. But I do have data to back it up, okay? So don't be offended, please. If you feel like I've overly typecasted you, like, come talk to me after. And please don't sue me, okay? So Nate Walkinshaw, a bunch of product leaders always talk about how there should be a 1-to-1 ratio with your UX designer and your product manager, right? And like, you guys are a team and you're partners, and you should be like super in sync with everything. And this is such an awesome relationship, and it's cool building products together, which is all true, right? But that doesn't take into account necessarily the actual relationship. If you feel differently, correct me if I'm wrong. But I have yet to see any articles, blog posts, talks given about the actual relationship. It's all like very, yeah, just work together, and like there should be a 1-to-1 ratio. Totally could be off on that, but I haven't seen anything. So while it's painted usually as like a really happy, rosy relationship and everything works great, it can be a little bit different than that. So if this relationship is so important, and like we're supposed to build products that change people's lives and make them easier, why isn't anybody giving us any relationship advice? And moreover, like, this is a marriage, and worse than that, this is an arranged marriage. I didn't get to pick my partner. I don't know about you guys, but that sucks, because you're placed with this person and you're supposed to make some really cool shit together. But like, how are you supposed to do that if you don't even know this person, if you didn't choose them, and you're forced to work together? So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Raise your hand if you are familiar with the predictive index. Only unstructured people. Cool. That's fine. There's the unstructured row right here. So here's what the predictive index is. It is a personality behavioral test. Everybody in structure has to take it, and it measures you across 4 different areas of discipline. So there's dominance, extroversion, patience, and formality. And you can be on the left or the right of the scale. The middle is kind of a normal, average person, doesn't show excessive like variation either way. Okay? So I'll put this over here to the right. What I did is I aggregated 10 product managers and 10 UX designers adding structure. So this is real data. This is the combination of our personalities on one graph, okay? And there's some really interesting stuff here. Okay, so first, product managers. So we are to the right of the scale on dominance, meaning we like to drive, we like to be in charge. We're also to the right of the scale on extroversion, so we like being in front of people, we like giving talks like this. We kind of want some credit, right? We like being out in the open. But the pendulum swings dramatically over on patience. So we have a very low tolerance for you taking a long time. We want you to get to the point quickly, and like, you can never go fast enough, okay? And then formality is really like process. Just think of that as process. So we hate process. We recognize there is some need for it, but unlike our scrum masters or program managers or project people, we don't care about that. We don't want to tick boxes off and check things off our to-do list. So, is anybody surprised by this? I see one nod.
Is this UX or DM?
PM. Yeah. So it sounds like you were surprised because you were thinking this was UX.
No, I thought this is the way you're talking about it.
Okay, cool. So yeah, this is 10 product managers aggregated at Structure. 3 of us are here right now. Okay, let's look at the UX designers. Again, 10 UX designers at Structure. These are real people. 2 of them are sitting right there. What do you think is going to happen? How does that look? We are total opposites. Okay, so at Structure, our UX designers are a lot more willing to let us drive. So me, the product manager. They also are a little bit more chill. They aren't extremely introverted, but they're to the left of the line. They're fine working in the zone by themselves and don't need to be out in front of people all the time. They have a huge shift over here with patience. So they're a lot more patient than us product managers. But what's cool is we actually meet here under the Formality, which is awesome. When I saw this, I was super happy because although we may be different in a lot of areas, we both have this need for building stuff quickly without a lot of process. We don't want roadblocks in our way. We don't want to have to do stuff that we don't want to. We just want to build stuff and don't worry about the process. So that is actually really amazing for me. Let me talk to you about some points of friction, at least at Structure. This is the biggest one. So myself as a product manager, I want my designer to go faster. We can always iterate faster, we can validate faster, we can do everything faster. There is some friction there because a lot of the times our designers, not all of them, but some of them, the ones that I've worked with, want to be more methodical, want to, especially when validating stuff. But they want to take their time and make sure that their designs are the best possible thing. But in my shoes, I'm thinking I only need 70%, maybe 80% accuracy or confidence that this is the right thing, and we can iterate in the next 20 to 30%. So let's just go, let's pick something. So this has been the biggest source of tension, I think. But to my knowledge and experience, this dominance has been totally fine. Unless there are some unexpressed feelings that anybody would like to share right now on the spot. But for the most part, designers are fine and cool with us just driving. Not that we leave them out, because this is a collaborative relationship. We always talk about how it needs to be together. But the product manager can lead out and do a lot of the strategy and kind of the ideation in leading that out. So, any questions or anybody want to call me out on this? Does this feel in line with what you guys were thinking? See a couple nods. I think, yeah, this is probably a pretty good generalization. So again, this is a generalization, and I am going to typecast us for the rest of the presentation like this, but I've got some data behind it. So when I saw that graph, this came to mind, right? Total opposites in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of good, I hate to use the word, synergy, right? There's a lot of great creative friction that happens because we're so different, which allows us to build better products. Okay, so I sent out a survey on the Product Hive channel and then also just internally at Structure. It was 4 designers, and I wanted to know 4 different things, and we're going to talk about that data right now. So, the first question I asked was, how would you relate your, how would you, rate your relationship with your product manager? So 1 being terrible, luckily I didn't get any 1s, and 5 being awesome. I was pretty happy with the data, 4 to 5, that's great. There's some 2 to 3s that we can talk about in a little bit. We're going to get into some of the qualitative stuff, but for the most part, people are happy, and 4 is a good place to be, but it's also great because there's a lot more that can be done to make the relationship better. Okay, so I want to tell you a story. When I first started working at Structure, I came into a project midstream. The designer had already done a ton of stuff and was kind of handing it over to devs, and they were in their first or second sprint of this work. So being new, I had no idea what to do. I deferred a lot to the designer and let him lead for a lot of this. Well, because we were midstream in this project and like there was also a lot of very specific dates we needed to hit, we were kind of focused in execution mode. And it wasn't until 6 months later that my designer came to me and said, I'm not happy. Wanted a divorce. Not a real divorce. We weren't married. That was a stupid joke. But we had this come to Jesus moment. He was like, this isn't working, man. Like, what did he say? I resent the designer I am now, like who I have to be because I have to like mold myself to the way you work. And that sucked for me to hear. Like, I thought everything was fine. Like, there were some bumps, but like nothing that bad. Like, this was like bad. So what we did was we had this come to Jesus moment. I said, all right, well, how do you want to work together? And we figured it out. But that was 6 months after I already started a new structure. Like, there was 2 whole projects and features that we shipped that we just had this pretty shitty relationship, and I had no idea. And I really wish I would have done that day one. So now, time has passed, and I've got a new designer. He's been with me for about 3 months now, maybe 4. Very first day, what did we do? I took him out to lunch, we sat down, I said, look, like, I want to know everything about you, maybe not all in this sitting, but we'll get there. Like, let's get to know each other, and how can we work together? Like, let's figure this out now, because that's going to be much better for our relationship long term. So what I would say is you guys need to have, even if you're like have been working with your PM that you're currently working with for a long time, like have a conversation. Talk about expectations, hobbies, family, past jobs, could be a spirit animal, whatever. But like, we always talk about having empathy for our users, and like how can we not build good how can we build good products when we don't have empathy for our users? But what about empathy for your coworkers? What about empathy for your product manager? If you guys are partners, there better be a damn lot of empathy there. And like, you guys better understand each other. And one important thing I would say about this as well is you need to get outside. It's a lot more disarming and relaxed if you can go to lunch, go on a walk, get coffee, whatever. Don't do this in a conference room. Don't do this in like a phone booth or a one-on-one room. Like, that's terrible. That's just weird. So I would say this is super important. If you're going to be getting a new PM, do this. If you already have a PM that you have been working with and haven't done this, you should still do this. This is super valuable. Okay. And you should talk about how they work, like I mentioned. Ask them what their workflow is. What do you expect from me? I asked this to my new designer, and he said, I've never had anybody ask me that before. He didn't even know what to say. He had to think about it a little bit. But he gave a great answer, and like we figured it out. It was awesome. How would you like to receive feedback? So I think at Instructure, we like to pride ourselves on always giving feedback, and the problem is, though, that people like to get feedback in different ways. Some people want a written response sent to them over the weekend so they can kind of think about it and then come back. Others want it like very informally, maybe even in front of other people. Like, you should really figure that out, because there's going to be a lot of feedback if this is going to be a successful relationship. Ask them what motivates them at work. I think a lot of companies and HR people like to talk about how awesome their company culture is, but like, not everybody's there for the company culture. Maybe it's just convenient. Maybe they couldn't find another job. Maybe it's just because they work close. Whatever it is, like, figure out why they're there and use that. And then, again, how can we work together? Let's figure this out. Any questions before I move on? Or thoughts? Feel free to, by the way, if anybody's like, dude, you're totally wrong, just doesn't say that. Like, I'm happy to hear that. And then I'll tell you why I'm not wrong. Okay, so going back to the survey, I asked the second question. How often do you have a one-on-one with your PM? So before I show the data, I'm gonna ask everybody in the room. We're gonna do a straw poll. For the designers, how often, by raise of hands, do you do a one-on-one with your product manager every week? 3 people. Damn. Okay, like, let's say every other week, every 2 weeks, something like that. Still not a lot of hands. Okay, every month. 2 months.
I sit next to my product manager.
Okay, we're gonna talk about that, because that's not good enough. Seriously.
Alright.
Okay, I'm serious. Talk to this guy in the blue shirt. He sits next to his designer as well, and there's nobody else there. and we're gonna talk about that. Okay, raise your hand if you've never had a one-on-one with your product manager. Okay, so here's what I'm saying. Nobody said weekly, like 3 people. Some said like every other week, and like sure, month, and then like a couple of people raised their hands for monthly, so, or excuse me, never. So what's the other option? No, that's fine. All right, let me just show you this, the results. So pretty good. Of the people that I asked, 43% are holding them weekly, which is the optimal, I would say. But what's the most concerning thing to me is this 21% in purple that have never had a one-on-one with their product manager. Now, let's talk about why you should have one-on-ones and what they are. So, this is a weekly relationship check-in, okay? It's just focused on the relationship. This allows you to adjust or iterate the stuff that you're doing to like course correct quickly, instead of 6 months down the road like I did, like an ass. The important thing here is this isn't a status update. Like, don't ask your product, or I guess if I'm a product manager, like, don't ask your designers, hey, like, where are you at on this project? Are we almost done? Like, no, you can do that anytime. If you sit next to your product manager, I'm sure you're doing that constantly. This is not that. This is a, hey, how are we working together? Am I doing anything to piss you off? And some of you may say, well, if we're doing this weekly and nothing's wrong, then we don't have anything to talk about and we can get rid of this meeting. Honestly, I did that for a while too. Like, oh, we're good. Like, I've got other things to do, like, let's just skip. That's not the right answer. If you don't have anything that's wrong in your relationship, that's awesome, but you should still take that half hour or hour or whatever you just designated and go do something. Like, just get out, go get to know them on a more personal level. Like, that's sacred time for you guys to bond. Because when you're on the floor working, there might not be a lot of bonding time. So I would still very strongly encourage keeping that time. All right. By a show of hands, who has had lunch with their product manager in the last 2 weeks? Just your product manager. Okay, that's pretty good. How about in the last 2 months? Okay. How about last year? That's really, how about never? Just you and your product manager, okay. Similar to the one-on-one, I see this as like a more infrequent thing, but like you should still do it like once a quarter. Go to lunch, get out of the office, go sit down with your product manager. Don't even talk about work. You can if you want, but like just get to know them better, okay? So this is similar, like if you're not having problems in your one-on-one, you should do a very similar thing, but this is gonna be huge. I'm a big proponent of like the no sad desk lunch thing. Here's a way to help you out with that. Okay. All right, I'm gonna pause here. Any questions or anybody want to rebut anything? Yeah.
What do you do if your PM or UX just doesn't make the time for these like one-on-ones or lunches?
It's a great idea, or a great question. It's easy for me to stand here and say, like, your product manager is an idiot.
Say that once.
But, what was that? But the reality is, and we'll get to this in a little bit when we look at the feedback, but product managers especially have really hectic calendars. Like, we have to meet with sales, marketing, product marketing, customer success, actual customers, prospects, like engineers, right? Like, there's a lot of burden on our time. But I think that any good product manager should realize that time with the UX designer is the most sacred because of that partnership, because of the fact that whatever you guys decide to build is going to get built, and that's what the customer sees. So you better make sure that that relationship is good. And like, so practically speaking, I would try to raise it to your boss, like maybe talk to their boss, like do something, or talk to them directly, that always works. But if you want to be more passive about it, whatever. Talk to them first, and then like go over to your boss or their boss. I think that should be happening though. Anything else? Yeah?
How do you define a one-on-one?
How do you define a one-on-one? Okay, so I think you should define it, but I define it as 30 minutes, me and my product manager, again, talking about our relationship, making sure everything's going well, not doing status updates of, hey, how's this project going? Did you finish this design? Other than that, super loose. You can do it inside, outside, whatever you want to do. Does that answer your question? Okay. And I think it should be flexible because people are different, right? People like different things. Okay. Now we're going to go through some responses, some qualitative feedback from this survey. So the question was, what do you not like about working with your PM? Okay. So some really interesting stuff. I'd like to go take a couple, actually there's like 6 responses, and we will talk about each of them. Okay, so the first one. First respondent said, not clear enough on requirements and technical limitations. Tight deadlines that appear suddenly, too much churn, and not enough nailed down vision. I'm not gonna ask for like who agrees with this, but I'm gonna speak to it a little bit. So, first sentence, not clear on expectations and requirements, or technical limitations, excuse me. This is a weakness of mine personally, just because we talked about like the tax of time and not having enough, but like I'll often create stories in Jira just as total like skeleton shell stories. I'll just create a bunch so that they're out there and it's off my list, and then as we get closer to building those and grooming those, like I'll fill them out with stuff. But until then, it's kind of fuzzy. So sometimes even like as we're grooming stuff, the ticket isn't filled out, and like I can do it in backlog grooming. So that's probably a weakness of mine, and like maybe that's common amongst other product managers. So have patience with them, please, I would say. But the tight deadlines that appear suddenly. So the way I interpreted this is like your projects that you're working on, your features that you know you're going to ship, that should stay very rigid. But there are times, because a lot of us work in SaaS and B2B stuff, there's a big deal on the line that just came up, and they need certain features or certain things. And you have to be flexible as a product team to accommodate that into your roadmap. So sometimes there are going to be things that just pile up on your plate, totally like out of the blue, but like that need to get done to land a deal. I'm super in favor of that personally. Obviously, it can't get excessive, but like that's just kind of the way it is. Like, we work at a business and we need to sell. So, sorry. Okay. Next one. She's not so hot on creating collaboration. She tends to be more the expert with the answers. So we saw, at least by Instructure's data, the product manager really likes to lead and be dominant. And so I can see a little bit of that tendency, but just because we're more dominant doesn't mean that we should rule out any sort of collaboration. Like, that's terrible. And your product manager is in the wrong. Like, you need to collaborate, even though they're a more dominating person, perhaps. That's what I'd say about that one. Unavailability. So this was to your point. You're like, hey, they don't have time to meet with me, right? Or, yeah, that was good. So yeah, we do have a lot of stuff on our plate. But if you're a good product manager, you're going to make time for your UX designer. You're going to make sure you always have that weekly one-on-one, and maybe even some scheduled time to collaborate every week. So, hey, we're going to set aside an hour. We'll go to the whiteboard. We'll do whatever we need. This is our like sacred working time. That's one way to get around that. But yeah, that kind of sucks. Like, we are busy, but that's not an excuse for your product manager. Like, they should make time for you. Okay, a little overzealous sometimes. Wants more features than we can deliver. So this one's interesting to me because I feel like I want to be the guy who's under-promising and over-delivering. So maybe your situation is different, but I always want to like cut how much we're expected to deliver. So maybe like have a conversation about that. Hey, should we scale this back and like actually exceed expectations? The overzealous, like product managers are really passionate about what they do usually. I think if you were a product manager who wasn't passionate about what you're doing, you're probably not a good one. So yeah, like that can happen. I don't know the specifics here, but like you just kind of have to figure out how to work with that and like channel that and harness it. Okay, what does this one say? They sometimes talk more than they execute. They often don't know the details and tend to spend a lot of time understanding things that maybe the business or engineering could tackle. So I can totally see they talk more than they execute. Like, product managers, that's what they do. That's like the most common trait we have with sales guys. Sales guys don't know anything. They're just demoing a product that they don't even use usually. Just talking about Instructure. So I'm sure that doesn't happen in your companies. But there is a little bit of an element to that. Now, if it's excessive, I think like that's probably a bad thing. Like product managers need to know the details, but there are some times where we'll say yes to things and we don't really know what we're talking about, but like you gotta go figure out the answer after you've already verbally committed or like said your answer. So there's a little bit of that. Okay. Ends up prioritizing the wrong set of features, which fragments the experience from what could have been, doesn't come back to design and adjust the prioritization so that we can curate the best experience for the restriction in place. Okay, here's what I think about this one. The first sentence, to me, is a matter of opinion. So you may think that they're prioritizing the wrong set of features, but have you told them that? Like, are you guys talking about that? I think at the end of the day, probably because I'm a product manager, the PM has probably the final call, like, no, this is what we're gonna do. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't fight for what you believe and the features that should be prioritized, okay? The second part, totally wrong on the PM. Like, if you're going to change a direction or prioritize something over another, like, you definitely need to make sure the UX designer is on the same page as you are, and that's being communicated. That's part of being a good partner. Okay, we just have two more. This one. I have had PMs in the past that feel like they know better than me. I don't claim to know more than they do, but we should trust in the product development process and principles. I believe that PM, UX, and dev lead should work together for a common goal and be involved in the discovery phase. Trust is gained when trust is given. So I underlined the last sentence because I'm super on board with that. Totally believe that. I think that PMs there's gonna be a little of that, like, they feel like they know more than you, because a lot of PMs feel like they're the smartest person in the room, honestly. And that's why they're PMs. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but like, that's just the way it is. So, yeah, your PM should be more humble, but like, you should still have a really collaborative relationship, and that's on the PM to do that. Okay, last one. This one made me sad. So they often focus on releasing features and solutions rather than solving problems in the right way or the best way. We're going to get to this in a little bit, but there's a hierarchy of needs, a Maslow hierarchy for product managers, and I'm going to punt this one for that time. But here's the part that I wanted to talk about. They talk poorly about me to other PMs. They're passive-aggressive, they don't clearly communicate expectations, they seem to constantly be looking for me to mess up instead of be successful. That is a big, big no-no. Like, total bad on the PM. If you're in that situation, like, I don't know, I would have hoped that you've already talked about that with them. But that being said, it's easy for me to say that because I'm not in that situation. It's harder to confront somebody. I get that. I hope that you guys would have enough trust in your relationship to be able to bring that up. If not, you need to run that up the chain, right, to your boss and their boss, or your boss to talk to their boss. But that sucks, and that's totally on the PM, and they suck. Okay. Now I want to finally give you guys like a little insight into our heads. So, what motivates us, what makes us tick, and what we want to see out of you guys. And I'm making some generalizations here, but I feel like they're fair. Okay. So what are PMs incentivized to? By the organization. And this may be different depending on what company you're at. So I totally realize that, but for me at Instructure, as a PM, this is what I'm incentivized to do. Find product market fit. You gotta build a product, ship a product, and make sure people will buy it. That is like, bar none, that is your job, you gotta figure that out, okay? You gotta deliver on time, especially if a customer is waiting for something or there's some sort of contractual obligation. The time commitment and the time expectation has to be hit. And I think that's where a lot of friction comes sometimes with designers who feel like a feature is half baked and maybe not fully fleshed out. But like, you gotta hit time, right? I think the business wants me to be predictable, both business and engineering. They're trying to make sure that if we get requests for stuff, or we say we're going to build X feature, we want to know how long it's going to take. You need to track those metrics. And that kind of falls on the PM. Lastly, delight customers. So I would contest for designers who say, my product manager only cares about shipping, only cares about time, only cares about being predictable. That's not true. Like, at least for me, I care a lot about delighting customers. I want to make experiences really cool and interesting and fun. However, these other needs have to be hit as well. Like, this is the hierarchy. So if we can do all of these, great. But just because I'm cutting scope doesn't mean that I don't care about delighting customers. We just have to fit some of these other requirements. And that's just the nature of my job. Because if we don't hit the date, or if we don't find product market fit, or if I'm not predictable, I'm the one who's on the line for that. So at the end of the day, that's what I care about the most. Anybody want to disagree? Does anybody feel like their PMs don't want to delight their customers? That's good. Okay. Now, talking to you designers, here is how you can make me happy as a PM. Okay, I have noticed the tendency to want to fully flesh out a feature, get all the designs to the highest fidelity as possible, get it all laced up in Envision, make sure it looks nice, make sure the interactions are good, and then we'll go validate to the customers. Then we'll go to our CPT if we're doing directive discovery, right? Please don't. Like, that is a lot of wasted time. What if we got the thing totally wrong? What if the workflow doesn't work? Like, the visuals are probably fine, but like, please, let's together validate our ideas, our workflow, and like the goals, the jobs to be done of whatever feature we're building before we get to the high fidelity. Like, let's not even touch that. Let's just go validate wireframes, boxes and arrows, paper, whatever, even a mind map. Like, let's do that first. Cut scope voluntarily. So a lot of the complaints I hear from designers are, I built this awesome, beautiful experience, and the product manager, that piece of shit, cut it all out. Like, he doesn't know what he's doing. Why would he cut these features? Well, if you cut scope at the very beginning and decide, hey, product manager, this is our MVP, and I think this is like the easiest to build first, like this quarter. And here are other things that we could do that are stretch goals that are cool and that would make it a very better experience. But I recognize as a designer that like this is the core value, and everything else is really nice and helpful and useful. But I'm willing to make this compromise. If you're able to do that in the very early design stages, you're not going to hear anything from your PM. They are going to love you, and they're not going to be cutting scope themselves and make you feel bad. Works every time, guaranteed. Don't fight me on it. Okay, I feel like I have been cursing a lot in this presentation, so I'm sorry. But I do feel passionate about this subject. So I have seen designers, not necessarily at Instructure, but designers who necessarily, who aren't passionate about the problem they're solving, aren't passionate about the customers, but do love the free lunches, the snacks, the ping pong, the unlimited PTO, whatever it is. Like, it's, from my perspective, they care more about that than they do their actual job with customers. That really pisses me off, because why are you here? Like, if you only care about that stuff, like, that's a problem for me, and that makes me really mad. And maybe that's just me personally, but there's some perspective. Okay, I've said this a couple times, but be fast. Because I have a low tolerance of patience, I want you to be faster. So like, we can always go faster. Please go faster. Okay? We can validate quicker. We can get to designs. We can design the stuff quicker. We don't need to do 5 iterations on a button. Like, let's go. We can iterate the rest of the way. So that is how to make me happy. Okay, so I just want to wrap this up. Here's our TLDR. It's too late for TLDR because you guys already sat through 38 minutes of my presentation. But obviously we are different, right? Like, you guys feel it, and we feel it, and I have data to back it up. At least in Instructure, like, we are very different, and that's okay. Like, that's probably better. Our differences make a better product, okay? But just because we're different doesn't mean that you can despise, curse, hate your PM, resent them, right? Like, you need to have empathy for your PM, and your PM needs to have empathy for you. So if you don't feel that reciprocated, you need to talk about that, okay? Again, how can you create killer products if you don't have empathy for your product manager? You need to figure out how to work together. So we talked about like the initial conversation where you sit down, hey, tell me about you, I'll tell you about me, here's where I'm coming from, how should we work best together? Here's how I like to get feedback, and here's how I work. You need to be holding weekly one-on-ones. Again, these are relationship-based, no status updates. It can be however long or short you want, but make sure you're always doing it. And as a bonus, I like getting out of the office. Sometimes even just on a different floor helps. Okay, I also believe in getting lunch occasionally, so outside of your one-on-ones, make sure you guys are getting out of the office, informally chatting, spending quality time with each other, and getting to know them better. Build that relationship, build that trust. And lastly, be nice. And that's all I have. Thank you. So, does anybody feel like they have questions or want to call me out on anything I said? Yes, back for this row.
Considering we don't have one-on-ones, we'll do a lot of talking and loose runs, so that's gonna help get our relationship going because it's so present, our DMs are super present. I'm curious, like you iterated the one-on-ones, the lunches, not talking about status updates or how do we best work together. Where do you see that being the best avenue? Like, or hey, are we working together? Are we writing feedback? That's not even a conversation.
So what I heard was, how do you, there's the very end that I had a hard time hearing. Can you repeat it again? Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so getting to the tactical question of how do we work best together? Where does that meeting happen? It's not the one-on-one.
Yeah, it's not the one-on-one. That's a separate thing. Yeah, totally separate. Ideally is like when you first start working together, but like that's probably not the case for anyone here, right? But if you haven't done so already, going to lunch would be a good way to do that. But have an outside meeting apart from your one-on-ones, talk about how to work together, and kind of set the ground rules for your relationship and what you expect from each other. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and following up, like just the like that weekly, like how we're monthly, how are we doing together? Like what can I improve? How can we iterate together? Where do you suggest doing that if it's not a one-on-one or lunch?
So there's the initial conversation, the one-on-ones, and then lunch occasionally. There's like 3 different buckets. Does that make sense? And the one-on-ones, you're checking like your criteria, like are we doing okay, is based on whatever your initial conversation was. Hey, this is how I like to work. So you always use those as like your metrics for your one-on-ones. Okay, like you said this is how you like to work. Are we doing that in the way that you actually like? And then the lunch is just like an informal relationship-based thing. Does that make sense? Okay. Classes, and then we'll give you.
What's the reporting relationship? Like, are they peers or are they direct?
Yeah. So at Instructure, it's peers, and a lot of other places it's also peers. So we report to different people, we're in different departments, which is part of the struggle as well. Well, I guess you could say it for if you report to your PM as well. I guess that's also a whole other beast. Everything I presented today was working under the assumption that you guys are peers, and that there is no reporting relationship there. If there is, man, I don't know what to say about that. I'd have to think about it. But that sucks, if that's your position.
That's kind of our.
Okay. What do I think about that? You know what? If they're your manager, you should have an equally open relationship with them. Like, philosophically, that's what I believe. You should be super open with them. All of my managers have been very candid with me. I felt like I could say anything I wanted to them, and they wouldn't judge me, they wouldn't get mad. But that's because the manager, set that expectation. If your manager doesn't set that expectation, time to look for a new job. I mean, that's really harsh, but I don't know what to say to that. Sorry. That makes me feel like that was a really sad answer, but that's all I can have. That's all I can give.
So we have a junior UX where I work at, where he reports to 3 product managers. How would you recommend he handles that situation with the advice you gave today?
What was the question?
Oh, sorry. So the question was, there's a junior PM, or excuse me, junior designer,
Yeah.
And that junior designer does work for 3 PMs,
Yes.
right? 3 different projects, and it's kind of helping out wherever, right?
Yeah.
Do those PMs also have separate designers?
No.
No, 1 designer for 3.
Yes.
Okay. Nothing changes. I think the junior designer, especially because they're junior, they need a lot of mentorship. They need help to figure this out. Junior designers should be having 3 separate one-on-ones every week. They should have time for that. Don't make it long, make it 15, 20 minutes. Like, you have that time in a week. Nothing changes. Yeah. I'm firm on that.
How about quarterly lunches? Does he just have one big lunch with 3 of them?
No, I would do separate.
Separate?
Yep, separate lunches, because it's about the relationship. And odds are, if you're going to lunch with all 3 of them, they presumably have been working together for a long time and know each other, and you're just going to be there, like, trying to, like, join in on the, like, it's like they've got the inside joke and you're trying to, like, get into their inside joke. Like, no, build a relationship with that person, right, and, like, do it separately. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, yeah.
So this one is it's a little more on like product in general,
Okay.
not so much the relationship. So you had a list up there of like the hierarchy. It was product market fit, timeline, whatever. I want to know how, or maybe your opinion on, because I feel like there's a lot of overlap in those,
Yeah.
and like dividing right like the customer. Basically being able to have like, because lots of times that timeline can be very fluid, where it's like, oh, well, if we can build this in a day, yeah, it's a day, but I feel like the timeline can like fluctuate. Like, how do you, I guess, have that relationship to, or when you as a PM decide like, hey, this is something we should push. For instance, like, so Alex presented this morning, and she talked about how at Asana, they went for their like, for their Android app, how like won awards for introducing like, for integrating their brand in it, which I feel like that is like, would be super low on a lot of people's priority, but it was something cool that they did, and push the limit of, you know, like something for their company, and it got the company much recognition, and I'm sure a bunch of people downloaded the app to go look at it, and it helped in that way, but maybe was not seen.
It's like core to the product, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was really wordy, sorry.
Yeah, no. I feel like since he's in the back, maybe I'll rephrase. So, how do you as a PM decide what goes in, what's out, and is it worth it? Like, is it going, even if it's, let's say it takes a long time, like, is that worth it to build with your timelines? That's what I interpreted your question
It's
as.
like, the one thing that stood out is you were like, this is the hierarchy of like,
Yeah.
what I do, product market fit, time. So I feel like that time one is very like volatile.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I will concede that is. And it depends on the project, it depends on the company. Like, there are so many variables there. So, like, for me, that like is my next tier, right? So can my answer be depends? It's just hard. It feels so situational to give like a correct response. But I will say, like, delight customers was still on there. So, like, maybe that need comes up a notch or 2, right? Because of the different variables. So it's not that I'm only focused on time. I'm not a project manager. I don't care about just shipping things on time. But I am kind of responsible to the company to, like, make sure we're releasing every so often. So I'm gonna say depends again. Okay, all right.
Let's say for, just example's sake, that you're a bad PM,
Yeah.
and that a designer wants to meet with you. What is the best sell, or like what's the best pitch for the designer to get time with you? And
That's a good question.
how's that go?
Okay, so the question was, let's say I am a terrible PM, and you're my designer, and you want to set some time up with me, but like I'm too busy or I don't want to meet. Like, how can you pitch it to me? My question to you is, do you want to meet with me because of like project-based stuff or like relationship-based?
Let's say both.
Both. Then my response to you should be, those should be separate meetings. But how do you pitch your PM who's way too busy and doesn't care about you? Hey, let's talk and sit down.
Like, what would be the magic phrase that would just
Yeah.
make you like,
What
this
is the
guy-
magic
this guy
phrase?
really wants he's trying to help me out.
Honestly, my first thought was like stroke their ego in some way, like make them feel really important. Like, hey, I'm looking for some mentorship. Like, you are so smart. I need your help on this thing. Like, who's not gonna say yes to that? Oh yeah, like I am smart. You're right, and like I would love to mentor you. So maybe that's a good. Isn't anybody have any other answers? Like, I'm not the only one. Like, does.
Pay for their lunch.
Oh yeah, great. I'll take a free lunch. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we talked earlier about finding time. My first thought was like breakfast. When I've been super busy,
Yep.
if someone's like pretend you're super into breakfast burritos.
Yeah.
Like do like an 8 o'clock or something.
Yep.
That's one for me.
Yeah. So great point. I've gotten breakfast with Gentry before because Gentry is a big deal. He's a director. Like he's got even more meetings than I do. So like we went out to breakfast and like
So like this.
usually.
This is amazing.
Yeah, like breakfast, like people can get in the office a little early, right? Or like skip their 9 o'clock meeting. That's a good one too. So breakfast, pay for the lunch, stroke their ego. Those are all good ways. Okay, anybody else? Okay. Thanks guys. Hopefully that wasn't like too, I know I could be like really brash and harsh. So like, there's a lot of nuance there, but like come talk to me and we can talk about it. Thanks.